Hello, guys. Thanks for joining me. We're going to look at Genesis 15 together. It's a short chapter, 21 verses. So we're leading on from obviously chapter 14, where Abram rescued Lot, and then Abram met this priest of God, Melchizedek. And so now we're moving into chapter 15. Let's just read it. And we'll chat about it for a sec. We'll maybe close in prayer. Okay. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Fear not, Abram. I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great. But Abram said, O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abram said, Behold, you have given me no offspring, and a member of my household will be my heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, This man shall not be your heir. Your very own son shall be your heir. And he brought him outside and said, Look toward heaven and number the stars, if you are able to number them. Then he said to them, So shall your offspring be. And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. Very important verse 6. And he said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out from Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess. But he said, O Lord God, how am I to know that I shall possess it? He said to him, Bring me a heifer 3 years old, a female goat 3 years old, a ram 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And he brought him all these, cut them in half, and laid each half over against the other. But he did not cut the birds in half. And when birds of prey came down, the carcasses, Abram drove them away. As the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abram, and behold, dreadful and great darkness fell upon him. Then the Lord said to Abram, Know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve. And afterward they shall come out with great possessions. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age. And they shall come back here in the 4th generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. When the sun had gone down and it was dark, behold, a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch passed between these pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, To your offspring I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, Jebusites. This is really interesting. We have God communing and talking to Abraham. This is before, like we mentioned in the last chapter as well, this is before we have like a law. We don't have yet Moses receiving commandments and these instructions on, in a sense, a religion, or how these people will worship this God. We don't have that yet. We have God speaking to a man and saying, this is where things are going. Father Abraham, right? We have Abraham in dialogue with God, direct relational dialogue. How will I know? And God makes a covenant with him. Now, this is interesting to me because up in the New Testament, we won't go there really now, but Zechariah, at the very beginning of Luke, an angel's talking to him about having a baby. His wife is also barren. Zechariah asked God, how will I know? Well, he asked the angel, Gabriel, and Gabriel is offended. I don't know if it's that petty, but Zechariah basically gets punished for asking for a sign when he's already talking to an angel, right? He's like, because you didn't believe me, you'll be mute. Here, Abraham, or Abram, who will become Abraham, whatever, he's talking to God, And he says, how will I know what you're saying is true? And God isn't taking offense or going, how dare you? He gets him to bring out all these animals for this kind of covenant promise ceremony. He doesn't, maybe at this point it was so new, I wonder. You see, by the time Zechariah came, they had the priesthood, they had the temple, and it was a bit more like, this isn't the first rodeo, right? But Abraham, there was no religion, temple. He's talking to this spirit. There wasn't a history of God's faithfulness and power with a nation that Abraham knew. This was all raw and real. So in a way, maybe it wasn't so much like he was doubting this spirit as he was trying to get to know this spirit, God didn't take offense. He made a covenant with him. It's almost like, as I read this, when it's like God is talking to him, he's like, how will I know? And then God makes this elaborate promise with him. And then it's almost like a booming voice or something. It says, know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners. This is after a dreadful and great darkness fell on him. It's like God said, I'm going to speak this to you in a way that is going to coat your skin. Like you're going to know what I'm telling you. One thing I love to see, a deep sleep fell on Abram, and behold, a dreadful and great darkness fell upon him. Sometimes when I'm trying to comfort little kids or something about darkness, I remind them that the darkness was made by God. God owns it the same way he owns the light. It says in Psalm 139:12, it says, the darkness is as light to God, right? Darkness can be deeply healing, deeply peaceful, intoxicating, beautiful darkness. Here we have a dreadful darkness that feels a little bit like fear, but it's holy fear. And every time people in the Bible encounter an angel, there's this fear, right? I was reading in Luke the other day. Was it Luke 8 or whenever when Jesus, Luke 7, beginning of Luke 7, when Jesus heals or he raises a man from the dead. It says fear seized the people. All the people looking on, fear seized the people. So, darkness, a holy darkness. Here we have this dreadful, great darkness. So listen, if you're going deep with God, it can be, you might get a holy type of shudder, all overwhelming, great dreadfulness isn't necessarily dark or in the sense of evil. God owns the darkness. He wants it. He can use it too, right? Enjoy it. Darkness, beautiful. And then he tells them what's going to happen, and we'll read about this in the Bible. These people, they go, they're slaves. And there's something to note here. I'm always harping on about a misunderstanding of God's sovereign will. Verse 14, but I will bring judgment. So it says, your peoples will be sojourners in a land. There will be servants there. Verse 14, but I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve. Why? Because they're mistreated. Why? Because God is not happy with how they mistreat these people. So here we have God. He sees where something's going. He's not okay with it. He's going to judge these people. So did God allow it? In a sense, friends, no. That's why he judges it. That's why he'll bring judgment on it. You can read in, again, the middle of Luke 7, where it talks about the Pharisees who rejected the purposes of God in their life. Literally, Luke 7, verse 30. We can reject the purposes of God. The fact that their people would go to Egypt, be fed there, live in the land of, Hebron or whatever, but the fact that the Egyptians then start to abuse them and take advantage of them, that is not the purposes of God, and he's going to judge them. So God can somehow see where this is going, doesn't block it, but doesn't allow it. Whatever that space and that sphere is, that's a holy space of understanding God's sovereign will, which means it's going to defy your words and it's going to defy your reason because we're so linear. We think if God can foresee suffering and he doesn't stop it, he somehow allowed it, willed it. That's wrong thinking because our minds are broken. Go back a few videos to when we're talking about Genesis 3 and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, through which death came. We can't trust our thinking. If God can foresee suffering, that doesn't mean he's allowing it the way we as humans can understand that, and maybe the only way we can understand it. That's why God knocks on the door of our mind, as it were, and says, I'm going to judge them for this. Because it's not okay with me. So if God foresees, foreknows, he has power, he does intervene, but he doesn't stop something evil that we believe he can stop. Don't misinterpret that with this low level of philosophy that's subject to, what does it say in Colossians 2:8? It says, see to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and the basic principles of this world rather than on Christ. That kind of philosophy is based on human tradition and the basic principles of this world. This is how we think. If, therefore, then it must have been that God. No, that's not what we see. So sovereign will, you might want to just even get rid of that. I don't even know where the whole sovereign will obsession comes from. Let's learn about how God acts, what God says, how God pointed, what God did, what God judges, what God doesn't judge. Let's learn God's ways. Let's stop talking about what his will is or was in things we don't understand. What we know is he hates sin and he will judge it. He never allows it. He doesn't want his spirit to ever be associated with it. That's what Jesus said. And basically he said that's the sin that can't be forgiven. When they were saying by the power of the devil you cast out demons, and he said that cannot be forgiven. When you start acting like I have a part in what the devil does that I'm going to judge, that's unforgivable. You're mixing me with the devil. The God we serve and the God of Abraham says these people are going to suffer, and I'm going to judge the people who did that to them. And if someone piped up and said, oh, but my philosophy class says if it happened and you have power, then therefore you allowed it. It's like, shut up. Seriously. It's immature thinking. It might be mature in worldly ways, but it's immature thinking in terms of the spiritual mind. And we're taught how to really discern spiritually. Read in 1 Corinthians 2, 13, 14, it talks about explaining spiritual realities with spirit-taught words, not words taught from this world. Folks, we don't think the way they think in a philosophy class or even maybe often a seminary class. We know the word and we let that influence our thinking so that we take captive our thoughts, 2 Corinthians 10, 3-5, and we subject our thoughts to Christ. And we subject them, Galatians 2:14, to the spirit of the gospel, not just the words. Is it God we want to know? Or do we just want to have a few answers for Bible trivia? Is it God we want to know? Or do we want to be able to explain away other people's sufferings? Or is it God we want to know? Because if it's God you want to know, like Christ, Luke 19:42 and Matthew 23:37, Jesus wept. Now that's John 11:35. But these other times he also wept. He wept over Jerusalem. He wept and said, I wish he didn't come out with answers all the time. He broke down with the suffering of people and moved in power. Are we doing that? Are we following Jesus or are we following our pride? Okay. So Abraham gets the promises. And he has to trust God. Verse 6, Genesis 15:6, Abraham believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness. This is referenced in Galatians 2 because it's showing that way back, even before the law, before people had commandments to follow, before people could be it shows that faith, the heart that believes God, right back here, it quotes Genesis 15:6. It says Abraham believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness. Belief. Hearing God, receiving and believing his word, taking him at his word. That is always what, in a sense, the gospel is. believing God and not thinking we can do it out of our own merit and righteousness. Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. We believe Jesus. It echoes and mirrors Abraham believing God, because Christ is one with God. We believe Jesus. Abraham believed God. It was credited to him as righteousness. It's credited to us as righteousness. We believe Jesus. All right, Genesis 15. We'll move on. God bless you.